My boyfriend slammed 4 designer suitcases onto the marble floor of my Chicago penthouse. The sound shattered my quiet Sunday morning. He crossed his arms, looked me dead in the eye, and delivered a demand that would end our relationship. His sister is staying here for good. I will be financing her entire lifestyle, and if I do not like it, I can pack my bags and get out of my own apartment. I looked at the man I had financially supported for 2 years, smiled calmly, and said loud and clear. Then I packed a single bag, walked downstairs to the leasing office, and legally destroyed his reality. My name is Natalie, 33 years old, and I work as a director of data analytics. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever taught an entitled partner an expensive lesson in boundaries. To understand this ridiculous moment, you need to understand our financial dynamic. We had been dating for 2 years. At 34 years old, Derek proudly called himself a startup consultant. In reality, he had not earned a paycheck in 24 months. I paid for our $6,500 a month penthouse. I paid for groceries. I paid the utility bills. I even paid the insurance on his luxury car. Derek felt completely entitled to my money. He constantly reminded me that as his future wife, it was my duty to invest in his potential. His entitlement peaked when his 30-year-old sister Cassidy showed up unannounced that Sunday. Cassidy was the family princess. She walked into my living room wearing sunglasses indoors, trailing her luggage behind her. She did not even say hello. She dropped onto my custom leather sofa and sighed heavily, complaining about how exhausted she was from her morning shopping spree. Derek wrapped a protective arm around her shoulders and glared at me. He explained that Cassidy was taking a break from her husband Jamal and needed a safe space to heal. He handed me a printed list. It detailed the things Cassidy would need to be comfortable during her indefinite stay. The list included a weekly allowance, a premium gym membership, and a complete wardrobe refresh. I stared at the paper in disbelief. I asked Derek if he had lost his mind. I reminded him that my name was the only name on the lease, and I was not running a luxury hotel for his spoiled sister. Derek puffed out his chest, trying to assert dominance in a home he did not pay for. He told me I was selfish. He said family takes care of family, and since my bank account was overflowing, I had no excuse. When I flatly refused to give Cassidy a dime, Derek issued his grand ultimatum. She stays, you pay, or you pack. He smirked, waiting for me to back down. He genuinely believed I was terrified of losing him. He thought he held all the power. He thought wrong. I operate on data and logic. I looked at him and said loud and clear. I walked into the bedroom and pulled a duffel bag from the closet. I packed my laptop, important documents, and enough clothes for a few days. When I walked back out, Cassidy had already made herself at home. She was popping the cork on a vintage champagne I had been saving. Derek laughed as I headed for the door, calling out that I would be back by dinner, begging for his forgiveness. I took the elevator straight down to the leasing office. The property manager named Pamela greeted me. I told her I needed to invoke the early termination clause of my lease immediately. Pamela pulled up my file. She explained that breaking the lease without notice would require a penalty fee equal to 2 months of rent, which was $13,000. She asked if I was absolutely sure. I handed her my corporate platinum card. I told her to run it. Within 10 minutes, my name was officially removed from the property. As I signed the final document, Pamela asked when I would be moving my guests out. I smiled and told her I had vacated, and the 2 people currently upstairs had absolutely no legal right to be there. I walked into the crisp Chicago air. I looked up at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my former apartment. Derek and Cassidy were up there sipping my champagne. They had no idea I had just surrendered the unit. They had no idea they were nothing more than unauthorized trespassers, and the manager was drafting their immediate eviction notice. I slid into the driver's seat of my car, the cold leather a sharp contrast to the adrenaline pumping through my veins. I did not cry. I did not feel heartbroken. Instead, I felt a massive, undeniable weight lift off my shoulders. I pulled out my phone and rested it against the steering wheel. Breaking the lease was only step one. Now it was time to cut the life support. Every single bill for that luxury penthouse was tied directly to my name and my personal bank account. I opened the utility company application on my phone. I tapped on the active service for our unit and selected the option to disconnect service. The automated system asked for an effective date. I selected today, right now. I confirmed the cancellation and watched the status change to pending disconnection. Next, I logged into my internet provider portal. Derek had insisted we needed the $1,000 a month business tier fiber optic internet for his so-called work. I navigated to the billing section and hit cancel. Just like that, the digital umbilical cord was severed. I also called the building management to confirm that the smart home features, including the automated blinds and the climate control systems linked to my account, were remotely deactivated. I drove to a nearby cafe, ordered a black coffee, and opened my laptop to book a room at a high-end downtown hotel. I wanted to be comfortable while the chaos unfolded. Exactly 47 minutes later, my phone screen lit up. It was Derek. The first text was merely annoyed. He wrote, "The internet just went down, call the provider and pay the bill right now." I ignored it. 5 minutes later, another text arrived, this time in all caps. He wrote, "You need to fix this immediately." I was in the middle of a raid, and my team just wiped because I lagged out. Cassidy is complaining that the thermostat turned off and it is freezing in here. A raid. He was playing a multiplayer video game at 2 in the afternoon on a Sunday. This was the brilliant tech visionary I had been supporting. For the past 24 months, Derek had paraded around Chicago networking events calling himself a startup consultant. He printed glossy business cards using my home office printer. He bought custom-tailored suits using my money. But in 2 full years, he had not landed a single paying client. He had not generated $1 of revenue. His daily routine consisted of sleeping until noon, playing online games for hours, and then complaining over dinner that the corporate world was simply too intimidated by his disruptive ideas. I had paid for his entire existence while he treated me like an ATM with a pulse demanding I fund his delusions. I took a sip of my coffee and watched the messages pour in. He was rapidly unraveling. The sudden lack of control was driving him crazy. He tried calling me twice. I let it go straight to voicemail. Then came a barrage of voice notes. I played one, holding the speaker close to my ear to hear his mounting frustration. His voice was laced with that familiar patronizing tone he always used when trying to put me in my place. He said, "Natalie, this little tantrum of yours is pathetic. Cassidy is stressed out because the water pressure just dropped to 0. You are embarrassing yourself in front of my family. Turn the utilities back on right now before I lose my patience. If you do not fix this in 10 minutes, I am not letting you back into the apartment tonight." I actually laughed out loud in the middle of the cafe. He was threatening to lock me out of an apartment I no longer rented. He still had absolutely no clue that Pamela from the leasing office was currently drafting a document that would force him onto the street. He was sitting in a dark, rapidly cooling room surrounded by his sister's ridiculous designer luggage, clinging to a completely false sense of authority. He thought he was the king of a castle that had just been sold out from under him. I decided to give him a tiny piece of reality. I typed out my first and only reply. I wrote, "I told you I was packing. I am gone. The apartment is yours. Enjoy the silence." I hit send. I knew exactly how he would react. Derek could not handle being dismissed. He needed to have the last word. He needed to prove he could still punish me. I watched the typing bubble appear, disappear, and appear again on my screen. Finally, his response came through. It was not an apology. It was not a plea for me to come back and talk things through. It was a declaration of financial war. He texted, "You want to play hardball? Fine. Turn the power back on or I am using the emergency credit card." I stared at his text message about the emergency credit card and actually smiled. He thought he was playing a trump card. He thought holding a piece of plastic with his name on it gave him leverage over my finances. I put my car in drive and headed toward the downtown luxury hotel I had just booked. I handed my keys to the valet, grabbed my single duffel bag, and walked into the grand lobby. The air smelled of expensive sandalwood, and the marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers. It was a stark contrast to the dark, freezing apartment Derek and Cassidy were currently occupying. As I approached the front desk to check in, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. Then it buzzed again, and again. By the time the receptionist asked for my identification, my phone was vibrating continuously like a tiny jackhammer. I pulled it out and looked at the lock screen. A cascade of Apple Pay decline notifications lit up the display. Transaction declined. $3,800 at a premium furniture retailer. Transaction declined. $450 at a boutique home goods store. Transaction declined. $600 at a luxury bedding outlet. He was not buying emergency supplies. He was not booking a hotel room for himself and his sister to escape the cold. Derek was actually trying to buy nearly $5,000 worth of brand new high-end furniture for Cassidy. He was trying to redesign the living room of an apartment he was about to be evicted from using my money, all because I had turned off the utilities. It was the ultimate display of his profound delusion. He genuinely believed that if he spent enough of my money, I would be forced to crawl back and apologize just to stop the financial bleeding. He wanted to punish me by hitting my bank account. I smiled at the receptionist, handed her my corporate card for the room deposit, and excused myself for a moment. I walked over to a quiet seating area in the lobby and opened my banking application. Let me explain the emergency credit card. A year ago, Derek convinced me he needed a credit card for actual emergencies, like if his car broke down while he was driving to one of his imaginary networking events. I added him as an authorized user to one of my premium travel accounts. He received a sleek metal card with his name printed on it. Over time, he started believing that card meant we had a joint account. He forgot that my social security number was the only one guaranteeing the credit line. He forgot that I retained absolute control over every single transaction. With 2 taps on my screen, I locked the card. But I knew locking it was not enough. I needed to erase his access completely so he could never try this again. I dialed the customer service number on the back of my card. Because of my premier status, a representative named Kevin answered almost immediately. I bypassed the small talk and verified my identity. I told Kevin I needed to permanently remove an authorized user from my account, effective right this second. Kevin asked for the name on the secondary card. I gave him Derek's full name. I listened to the clicking of a keyboard on the other end of the line. Kevin informed me that there were currently several pending high-dollar transactions attempting to process from a furniture retailer. I told him to flag every single one of those attempts as unauthorized and decline them all. Kevin confirmed the changes. He stated clearly that Derek's card was now officially deactivated, permanently canceled, and flagged in their system. The heavy metal card Derek was currently waving in the face of some poor retail cashier was now entirely useless. It was nothing more than a shiny piece of garbage. I thanked Kevin, hung up the phone, and walked back to the reception desk. The receptionist handed me my room key and directed me to the penthouse suites on the top floor. I rode the elevator up, feeling completely at peace. I walked into my suite, dropped my bag, and sank into the plush king-sized bed. The room was warm, the lights were bright, and I was entirely in control of my life again. I placed my phone on the nightstand, expecting Derek to flood my inbox with angry messages about the humiliating decline at the furniture store cash register. I waited for the inevitable tantrum, but the text never came. Instead, the phone began to ring loudly, piercing the quiet of my hotel room. I glanced at the caller identification, fully expecting to see Derek's name flashing on the screen. It was not him. It was a contact I had saved 2 years ago and rarely ever spoke to. It was his mother, Brenda, and the exact second I answered the call, she was already screaming at the top of her lungs. The sound of Brenda's voice was so piercing that I actually had to pull the phone away from my ear. She did not even bother saying hello. She launched straight into a hysterical tirade, calling me a monster, a cold-hearted snake, and a selfish little girl. She demanded to know how I could be so cruel as to abandon my own family on a Sunday afternoon without warning. I let her scream until she paused to take a breath. Then, in the calmest voice I could manage, I corrected her. I told her that Derek was not my husband, Cassidy was certainly not my sister, and none of them were my family. I reminded her that her grown children were currently squatting in an apartment they did not pay for, and I was simply removing myself from a financially abusive situation. That rational response only poured gasoline on Brenda's delusional fire. She scoffed loudly into the receiver, her voice dripping with venom and unearned entitlement. She told me I was being completely dramatic over a few utility bills and a couple of pieces of furniture. Then she delivered a line that perfectly encapsulated the toxic mindset she had instilled in her son for decades. She yelled, "You make 6 figures, Natalie. You have more than enough money. It is your absolute duty as his future wife to support him while he builds his tech empire. You did it last year when you paid off the remaining loan on his luxury car, so do not act like paying for Cassidy to be comfortable is suddenly a massive burden on you. Family takes care of family, and you are failing my son." Her words hung in the air, confirming everything I had finally woken up to. Last year, Derek had convinced me that his startup was just weeks away from a massive venture capital funding round. He claimed that the bank was threatening to repossess his imported sedan, and losing his vehicle would ruin his professional image in front of his wealthy investors. Like a fool blinded by the promise of a shared future, I wrote a check for $18,000 to clear his auto loan. There was no funding round. There were no investors. He just wanted a free luxury car. Brenda bringing up that specific memory was a massive miscalculation on her part. She thought it proved my obligation to him. To me, it only highlighted the staggering extent of their financial parasitism. I had literally bought the car he used to drive to his imaginary business meetings. I listened to Brenda continue to ramble about how successful Derek was going to be and how I would deeply regret walking away when he became a millionaire. I realized in that moment that negotiating with delusion is a complete waste of time. She was the architect of his profound entitlement. I did not raise my voice. I did not insult her. I simply spoke with cold clinical precision. I said, "Brenda, your son is a 34-year-old unemployed man who throws tantrums over video games. He has no empire. He has no money. And as of today, he has no girlfriend to fund his life. I highly suggest you prepare the guest room at your house, because he and Cassidy will be needing a place to sleep very soon. Good luck." Before she could utter another screeching syllable, I ended the call. I went straight into my phone settings, selected her contact profile, and hit block. I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in 2 years, the constant, exhausting demands of Derek and his entire family were met with a solid, impenetrable wall. I walked over to the minibar, poured myself a glass of sparkling water, and walked toward the massive floor-to-ceiling window of my hotel suite. I looked out over the Chicago skyline, watching the city lights begin to flicker on as the late afternoon sun dipped behind the skyscrapers. I felt safe. I felt victorious. I genuinely believed the worst of the chaos was over. I took a slow sip of my water, ready to finally relax and order room service. But my peace lasted exactly 4 minutes. My cell phone vibrated against the marble countertop of the minibar. I glanced at the screen, expecting another one of Derek's relatives to be calling from an unknown number. Instead, the caller identification displayed the front desk security number of my former apartment building. I picked up the phone immediately. It was David, the head of security for the high-rise. His voice was tense and professional, lacking its usual friendly warmth. He said, "Miss Natalie, I apologize for the interruption, but we have a serious situation down here in the loading dock. Your former guest Derek is attempting to leave the premises through the freight elevator. He is pushing a heavy utility cart loaded with your dual-monitored desktop computers, your backup data hard drives, and your expensive corporate servers. He is screaming at my staff, claiming you legally gifted all of this equipment to him for his startup company. Given your abrupt lease termination and your clear instructions earlier today, I needed your direct authorization before I let him walk out the door with $20,000 worth of your hardware. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady and authoritative. I told David that under no circumstances was Derek allowed to leave the building with a single piece of my computer equipment. I explicitly stated that those machines were the property of my corporate employer and contained highly sensitive data analytics models. If Derek took one step out of that loading dock with my servers, I would immediately press charges for grand larceny and corporate espionage, and I would make sure federal authorities were involved. I heard David confidently relay the message. In the background, Derek's muffled shouts echoed through the phone receiver. He was frantically screaming that he needed the computers for his startup and that I was acting like a jealous ex trying to sabotage his imminent success. David informed me that Pamela, the property manager, had just arrived at the loading dock with a security clipboard in her hand. I asked David to put me on speakerphone so I could hear exactly how this unfolded. Pamela took control of the situation immediately. Her tone was strictly business, stripped of any customer service warmth. She informed Derek that not only was he permanently barred from removing any property that did not belong to him, but he was also formally being served with a notice to vacate. Pamela handed him a thick white envelope. She explained that since I had legally terminated the lease and paid the early exit penalty in full, the luxury unit was now back in the exclusive possession of the property management company. I listened intently as Derek tried to play his final desperate legal card. He puffed out his chest and loudly declared that he knew his rights as a resident of Chicago. He arrogantly shouted about squatter rights and tenant protection laws. He claimed that because he had received mail at the address for 2 years and had his driver license registered there, the building legally had to give him 30 days to vacate through a formal, lengthy court eviction process. He smirked audibly, mocking Pamela, telling her she was violating state housing laws and that his lawyers would sue the building management for an illegal lockout. Pamela did not even flinch. She managed luxury real estate for a living and had dealt with entitled parasites before. She calmly and methodically corrected his gross misunderstanding of the law. She explained that squatter rights and tenant protections only apply to individuals who can prove they have an established independent tenancy or have been making consistent rent payments. Since my name was the sole name on the lease document, I was the sole source of all financial transactions from my personal bank account, and I had officially surrendered the property. His legal status had instantly changed. He was no longer the authorized guest of a legal tenant. Pamela stated clearly that Derek was now categorized as an unauthorized trespasser on private corporate property. She delivered the final crushing blow. She gave him exactly 24 hours to remove his personal clothing and his sister's ridiculous designer luggage from the premises. If he and Cassidy were not entirely gone by 3 o'clock the following afternoon, she would not be wasting time filing a civil eviction notice in housing court. She would be calling the Chicago Police Department directly to have them arrested and physically removed for criminal trespassing. Furthermore, David and the security team were instructed to escort him back upstairs to ensure my computer equipment was safely returned, and they would monitor his every move until he vacated the premises. The silence on the other end of the speakerphone was incredibly satisfying. The harsh reality of his situation had finally crashed down on his delusions. There was no emergency credit card to fall back on. There was no internet connection to escape into his video games. There was no electricity to heat the apartment. And now there was no legal loophole to keep him living the high life in the penthouse. He was flat broke, he was about to be officially homeless, and his own sister was currently upstairs, freezing in the dark, waiting for him to fix a problem he had entirely caused. I thanked David and Pamela for their outstanding professionalism and ended the call. I finally ordered my room service dinner, feeling a profound sense of closure. I assumed Derek would spend the next 24 hours frantically packing his bags in the dark and begging his mother to come pick them up in her minivan. I severely underestimated how deeply his toxic entitlement ran. Realizing he had absolutely no home, no money, and no legal leverage over my bank accounts, Derek decided to escalate the situation from a clean financial break to a deeply personal and malicious attack. If he could not steal my money or my business computers, he was going to target the one living thing I loved more than anything else in the world. My phone screen lit up with a call from Pause and Play, the premium dog daycare facility where my 3-year-old golden retriever Apollo spent his afternoons. The manager, a usually cheerful woman named Shannon, sounded panicked and breathless. She whispered into the receiver that Derek was currently standing in her reception area, loudly demanding that they release Apollo into his custody. He was spinning a frantic lie, claiming that I had suffered a severe medical emergency and had explicitly sent him to collect the dog. But Shannon was smart. She knew I was a meticulous person. When I registered Apollo at her facility, I had explicitly filled out a legally binding authorization form stating that I was the absolute sole owner, and under no circumstances was anyone else allowed to remove my dog from their premises. Shannon told me Derek was growing increasingly agitated and was threatening to call the police on her for withholding what he called his family pet. I told Shannon to keep the inner doors locked, to absolutely not bring Apollo out to the front, and that I would be there in under 10 minutes. I grabbed my car keys, abandoned my room service dinner, and sprinted to the hotel elevator. My mind raced as I navigated the evening Chicago traffic. Derek was not a dog lover. He constantly complained about Apollo shedding on his clothes and whining during his video game sessions. He did not want my dog for companionship. He wanted leverage. He was trying to take a living, breathing hostage. I pulled into the daycare parking lot and slammed my car into park. Through the large glass windows of the lobby, I saw Derek pacing back and forth, yelling at the poor teenage receptionist behind the counter. I pushed open the front door and stepped inside. Derek spun around. The moment he saw me, a smug, victorious grin spread across his face. He genuinely believed he had finally found the pressure point that would force me to surrender. Before I could even speak, he crossed his arms and delivered his ransom demand right there in the lobby. He said, "You think you can just cut me off and leave my sister in the dark? I am taking the dog. You are going to turn the power back on, unfreeze my credit card, and apologize to my mother, or you are never seeing this mud again." I did not entertain his extortion. I did not scream or cry. I simply walked right past him to the front desk. I pulled out my phone and opened my encrypted document folder. I showed Shannon the original breeder adoption contract with only my signature on it. I showed her the city licensing registration in my name. I showed her the microchip registry data, which listed me as the sole contact. Finally, I showed her 2 years of comprehensive veterinary bills, all paid from the exact same corporate bank account that Derek was currently locked out of. He had never purchased a single bag of kibble, let alone contributed to Apollo's care. I looked at Shannon and stated clearly that this man had absolutely zero legal rights to my animal and was attempting theft. Shannon nodded, completely reassured by the paper trail. She buzzed the back door open and a staff member brought Apollo out. My golden retriever wagged his tail happily, completely oblivious to the fact that he was almost used as a pawn in a financial extortion scheme. I clipped his leash to his collar, thanked Shannon for her diligence, and turned to leave. Derek was seething. His ultimate trump card had just been effortlessly swatted away by a few PDF documents on my phone. He stormed out of the lobby right behind me. As I reached the driver's side door of my car, he suddenly lunged forward. The cold evening air bit at my skin, but I kept my posture completely rigid, refusing to show him even an ounce of the fear he was desperately trying to provoke. He slammed his hand against my car window, physically blocking me from opening the door. His face was inches from mine, his eyes wide with a terrifying, unhinged rage. He realized his manipulative tactics were useless, so he resorted to pure, primitive intimidation. He pinned me against the side of my vehicle. He pointed a finger directly in my face, his voice dropping to a harsh, malicious whisper. He told me that I had made the biggest mistake of my life. He threatened to ruin my career, to destroy my reputation, and explicitly stated he would physically make me pay for humiliating him today. He thought he was being powerful. He thought he could terrify me into submission because the parking lot appeared empty in the evening shadows. He was completely unaware of the brand-new ultra-high-definition security cameras the daycare had just installed directly above the entrance, capturing his violent physical intimidation and recording every single word of his threat in crystal-clear audio. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I simply raised my right hand and pointed a single finger at the glowing red light of the dome camera, positioned exactly 2 feet above his head. Derek froze. His eyes darted upward following my gesture. The color instantly drained from his face as his brain processed what that meant. Every vile threat, every aggressive movement, and the exact moment he physically pinned me against my vehicle had been perfectly documented. I calmly told him to back away from my car before I called the police. He stumbled backward, his false bravado entirely shattered by the realization that he had just committed a crime on tape. I opened my door, commanded Apollo to jump into the back seat, and drove away without looking back in the rearview mirror. Early the next morning, I did not log into my corporate network. I went straight back to the daycare center. Shannon had already downloaded the high-definition video and audio files onto a secure flash drive for me. From there, I drove directly to the county courthouse downtown. I walked into the Domestic Relations Division and asked the clerk for the paperwork to file an emergency temporary restraining order. I sat on a hard wooden bench and meticulously filled out every single line. I detailed the financial abuse, the sudden lease termination, and the physical altercation in the parking lot. When I was called before the judge, I did not have to cry or plead or rely on my word against his. I operate on data, and I handed over the flash drive as my absolute proof. The judge watched the footage on his monitor. He listened to Derek explicitly threaten to ruin my career and cause me severe physical harm. The entire hearing lasted less than 10 minutes. The judge looked completely disgusted by what he saw. He signed the emergency order immediately legally, barring Derek from coming within 500 feet of me, my workplace, my temporary residence, or my dog. He handed the paperwork to a court officer and assured me it would be served that very day. I knew exactly where Derek would be that afternoon. He had until 3 o'clock to vacate my former penthouse or face criminal trespassing charges. At 2:45, my cell phone rang. It was David, the head of building security. He wanted to give me a courtesy update on the eviction process, but he ended up describing a scene of absolute poetic justice. David told me that Derek and Cassidy had failed to secure a professional moving truck because their credit was terrible and my funds were cut off. They were forced to drag their belongings through the pristine marble-clad lobby in giant black plastic trash bags. The wealthy residents of the luxury building were staring in absolute shock as Derek sweated and swore, struggling to push a broken luggage cart piled high with garbage bags toward the glass revolving doors. But the ultimate humiliation happened right as he reached the front sidewalk. A marked Chicago Police Department cruiser pulled up to the curb, with its lights flashing. 2 uniformed officers stepped out and intercepted Derek right in front of a crowd of wealthy onlookers. They loudly confirmed his identity, unclipped the thick stack of legal documents, and served him with my temporary restraining order right there on the busy street. David said. Derek turned bright red, completely humiliated, as the officers explicitly warned him that any attempt to contact me would result in his immediate arrest and incarceration. Cassidy was crying, trying to hide her face behind a trash bag as neighbors whispered and pointed at the spectacle. When David finished the story, I thanked him profusely for his help. I ended the call and leaned back against the plush headboard of my hotel bed. Apollo was resting his chin on my leg, completely safe and content. The utilities were cut, the credit card was dead, the lease was broken, and now a solid legal fortress protected me from any further harassment. I closed my eyes and let out a deep, long sigh of relief. I genuinely believed I had won. I thought the nightmare was entirely over, and I could finally start rebuilding my peaceful life. I reached for my laptop to check my work emails, ready to transition back to normalcy. But as my inbox refreshed, a single unread message appeared at the very top of the screen. It was not from my boss or my analytics team. It was sent from a highly secure encrypted Proton mail address. There was no subject line. There was no greeting in the body of the email. There was only a single sentence that made my blood run completely cold. It read, "They are trying to ruin your life. Meet me at the 8th Street Cafe at noon." Attached to the cryptic message was a single PDF document. I clicked on the file to open it, expecting some kind of angry letter from Brenda or a fake legal threat from Derek. But what I saw displayed on my screen was so legally terrifying, it made the parking lot altercation look like absolute child's play. The document staring back at me was an official United States Small Business Administration loan application. The total requested funding amount was $150,000. The primary business applicant was listed as Derek's fictitious consulting firm. I scrolled down to the guarantor section, my heart pounding rapidly against my ribs. There, printed in crisp black ink, was my full legal name, my current address, and my personal social security number. Below my stolen identity was a signature. It was a sloppy, pathetic attempt at copying my handwriting, but it was sitting right there on the legally binding guarantor line. Derek had secretly tied me to a massive federal loan without my knowledge. To apply for an SBA loan of that magnitude, the bank requires extensive financial documentation. Derek could not simply type my social security number into a basic online form. He needed verifiable proof of income. I instantly realized that during the 2 years he lived in my penthouse, he must have rummaged through my locked home office filing cabinet. He had physically stolen copies of my W-2 forms, my corporate pay stubs, and my previous tax returns to build a flawless guarantor profile. The level of premeditation made my stomach turn. He had used my immaculate credit score to bypass the bank's strict approval algorithms. My mind immediately calculated the catastrophic damage this could cause. If this loan was approved and the funds were dispersed, Derek would take the $150,000 and blow it on his delusions of grandeur. When his fake startup inevitably failed, and he defaulted on the payments, the federal government would not go after his empty checking accounts. They would come directly for me. They would garnish my 6-figure salary, destroy my credit, and potentially seize my investments. This was not just a desperate cash grab by an unemployed man. This was a calculated act of identity theft and federal wire fraud. He was willing to financially execute me just to fund his lifestyle. I looked back at the single sentence in the email body. "They are trying to ruin your life. Meet me at the 8th Street Cafe at noon." I checked the sender address again. Proton Mail is an end-to-end encrypted email service designed for absolute anonymity. The person who sent this was not just a casual observer. They were someone with inside access to Derek's computer or his fraudulent business email accounts, and they knew exactly how to cover their digital tracks. I checked the timestamp on the PDF properties. The application had been submitted electronically just 2 days ago. It was still in the pending review phase. The money had not been wired yet. The anonymous whistleblower had intercepted this document at the exact right moment. I looked at the clock on my hotel nightstand. It was barely 9 in the morning. I had 3 hours before the scheduled meeting. I immediately saved a secure backup of the PDF to my encrypted corporate cloud drive. I took a quick shower, changed into a sharp, tailored business suit, and packed my briefcase. I brought my laptop, the flash drive containing the parking lot security footage, and a physical copy of the restraining order I had just secured from the judge. I did not know if I was walking into a trap set by Brenda or meeting a genuine ally, but I was fully prepared for a war. I drove toward the 8th Street Cafe. It was a quiet, upscale coffee shop, tucked away from the busy downtown financial district, known for its privacy and high-end clientele. It was the perfect place for a discreet meeting. I parked my car, took a deep breath, and pushed open the heavy glass door. The rich smell of roasted espresso and baked pastries filled the air. I scanned the room. There were a few professionals working on laptops and two couples chatting quietly near the front window. None of them looked like the type to send an encrypted whistleblower email about federal bank fraud. I walked further into the cafe, my eyes sweeping toward the dimly lit booths in the very back. Sitting alone at a corner table was a man I never expected to see. He was nursing a black coffee, his posture rigid, and his expression incredibly serious. He wore a crisp, tailored navy blazer over a fitted shirt. It was Jamal Cassidy's husband. Jamal was a 35-year-old African-American supply chain manager who always seemed too intelligent and grounded to be married into Derek's chaotic family. I had only met him a handful of times at awkward holiday dinners, where he mostly stayed quiet, observing the dysfunction with a polite but distant smile. Today, there was no polite smile. He looked up, made direct eye contact with me, and gave a slow, grave nod. He tapped the thick manila folder resting on the table in front of him. I suddenly realized that Derek had not just stolen from me. The rabbit hole of their family fraud went much deeper. I slid into the booth across from him, placing my briefcase on the leather seat next to me. Jamal did not offer small talk or pleasantries. He pushed his coffee cup to the side and immediately slid the thick manila folder across the polished wooden table. He kept his hands resting flat on the surface, his posture exuding a calm but intense focus. Before we got to the federal loan application, Jamal needed to clarify exactly why his wife had suddenly moved into my home. He looked at me with a steady, analyzing gaze. He said Cassidy packed her bags last week and told me you were in severe financial trouble. She claimed you were drowning in credit card debt, that your company was downsizing, and that you had literally begged her and Derek to move into the penthouse to help you cover the rent. She framed her entire departure as a charitable rescue mission to save you from eviction. I stared at him, momentarily stunned by the sheer audacity of the lie. Cassidy had spun a narrative that made her look like a generous savior while painting me as a desperate failure. I quickly corrected the record. I told Jamal that I was the sole provider for the last 2 years. I explained that I paid every single bill, that Derek had not contributed a single dollar to our living expenses, and that I had just spent $13,000 of my own money to break the lease and legally evict his wife and her brother. Jamal closed his eyes for a brief second and let out a heavy sigh. He did not look shocked. He looked like a man who had just had his worst suspicions confirmed. He tapped his index finger against the manila folder. He explained that as a supply chain manager who handled multi-million-dollar logistics contracts, his entire career was built on tracking data and identifying discrepancies. He was meticulous with numbers. A few days ago, he sat down at the home desktop computer he shared with Cassidy to begin preparing their annual joint tax return. While searching for a specific digital receipt, he noticed a hidden password-protected directory buried deep in the system files. He bypassed the basic security and opened it. What he found inside was a digital paper trail of absolute criminal fraud. Jamal explained that Cassidy and Derek had been collaborating for weeks. Cassidy had used the high-resolution scanner in her home office to digitize the physical copies of my W-2 forms and tax returns that Derek had stolen from my filing cabinet. Jamal found the practice sheets where Cassidy had repeatedly tried to forge my signature until she perfected it. He found the final submitted PDF of the Small Business Administration loan application, requesting $150,000 completely guaranteed by my stolen Social Security number. Jamal kept his voice low, but the absolute disgust was evident in his tone. He told me that Derek had convinced Cassidy that his tech startup was a guaranteed success. Derek promised her a massive cut of the federal loan money to fund her shopping addiction and maintain her fake wealthy lifestyle on social media. They were willing to commit federal wire fraud and completely destroy my financial future just to get their hands on government funds. I asked Jamal why he was doing this. By handing me this evidence, he was actively implicating his own wife in a major federal crime. He was risking his marriage and his own peace of mind. Jamal looked out the cafe window for a moment, watching the city traffic, before turning back to me. He stated simply that right is right and wrong is wrong. He could not stand by and let two entitled parasites financially execute an innocent woman. He knew that if the bank approved the loan and dispersed the funds, I would spend the next decade fighting the government to clear my name. He sent the encrypted email because he wanted to give me the exact ammunition I needed to stop the transaction before the money ever hit Derek's fraudulent business account. I placed my hand over the folder, feeling a surge of immense gratitude. I told Jamal I was taking this directly to the authorities, and that I would make sure his identity was protected if he wanted to stay out of the legal crossfire. I thought the mystery was solved. I thought the SBA loan was the absolute peak of their criminal behavior. Jamal leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His expression grew even darker, the professional composure slipping just enough to reveal a deep, simmering rage underneath. He looked directly into my eyes and told me I absolutely needed to go to the police. But before I did, I needed to open the folder and look at the second stack of documents inside, because they did not just steal my identity. Jamal let out a bitter, exhausted breath and stated that he did not just call me here to save my credit score. He called me here because we had a common enemy. I was not the only person they robbed. He was a victim too. Jamal flipped over the thick stack of papers on the left side of the folder. They were not tax returns or loan applications. They were detailed financial statements from his employer-sponsored retirement account. He pointed to a highlighted line near the bottom of the first page. I leaned in and read the number. $80,000 had been prematurely withdrawn from his 401k. A massive penalty had been applied, and the funds had been transferred to an external checking account that Jamal did not recognize. He kept his voice dangerously quiet. He explained that he had been contributing the maximum percentage of his salary to that retirement fund for 10 years. It was their future. It was the money they were supposed to use to buy a house in the suburbs and start a family. But while he was working 50-hour weeks managing supply chains, Cassidy was living a completely separate secret life on the internet. Jamal pulled out a secondary stack of papers. These were credit card statements, in Cassidy's name, mailed to a private post office box she had opened without his knowledge. The balances were staggering. She had racked up over $60,000 in high-interest debt, buying luxury handbags, premium skincare, and expensive shoes. She spent thousands on lavish weekend trips with her friends, telling Jamal that her mother Brenda had paid for the vacations as a gift. It was all a complete lie. She was funding a fake wealthy lifestyle for her thousands of Instagram followers. She desperately needed to maintain the illusion of being a high society wife. When the credit card companies threatened to sue her, she panicked. She knew Jamal monitored their joint checking account meticulously, so she went after the one account he only checked quarterly, his 401k. Jamal explained how she had intercepted the mail, acquired his account number, and called the brokerage firm. She had all of his personal information. She successfully bypassed the security questions, forged his signature on the hardship withdrawal forms, and requested the maximum allowable distribution. She stole $80,000 of his hard-earned money, paid off her secret credit cards, and blew the rest on the very designer luggage Derek had hauled into my apartment yesterday. I sat back against the leather booth, processing the sheer magnitude of their deception. Derek and Cassidy were not just lazy or entitled. They were active financial predators. They targeted the people closest to them, the people who worked hard and acted responsibly, and drained them like parasites. Jamal looked at me, his eyes completely void of the typical heartbreak you would expect from a betrayed husband. There were no tears. There was no shaking voice or desperate plea for understanding. He had already grieved the death of his marriage. Now he was entirely focused on the execution of justice. He stated that he had already secured a ruthless divorce attorney, but he needed to coordinate his strike with mine. If he filed for divorce and froze her assets now, she would immediately run to Derek, and Derek would rush the federal loan application. They needed to time their legal actions perfectly to trap both siblings at the exact same time. I looked at the African-American man sitting across from me. We were two entirely different people from different backgrounds who had somehow been caught in the exact same web of delusion spun by Brenda and her children. We did not need to cry on each other's shoulders. We needed a battle plan. I agreed instantly. I told Jamal I was heading straight to the federal authorities and the credit bureaus the moment I left this cafe. We formed a cold, calculated alliance right there in the booth. We would communicate through encrypted channels. We would lock down every single financial avenue they had left. We were going to let them build their house of cards as high as possible, and then we were going to set the entire foundation on fire. We spent the next 30 minutes meticulously documenting every piece of evidence. I used a secure scanning application on my phone to digitize his 401k statements while he reviewed the screenshots of Derek's threatening text messages. We were perfectly synchronized. We were just finalizing the plan to contact the specific bank holding the fraudulent SBA loan application when Jamal's cell phone suddenly vibrated loudly against the wooden table. The screen lit up with a banner notification from a social media application. Jamal frowned, picking up the phone. He stared at the screen for a long moment, his jaw tightening so hard a muscle twitched in his cheek. He slid the phone across the table so I could see it. It was a notification that Cassidy had just started a Facebook Live video. But the thumbnail image was not just Cassidy showing off her makeup or her stolen designer clothes. It was Cassidy and Derek sitting together on the worn-out sofa in Brenda's dark basement staring directly into the camera. And the title of their live broadcast clearly indicated they were preparing to broadcast a massive, humiliating lie to everyone we knew. The title of the live broadcast was completely unhinged. It read, "Surviving a Narcissist, the Truth About My Abusive Ex." Jamal tapped the screen to unmute the audio. We sat in silence in the back booth of the cafe, watching the two of them execute a perfectly choreographed performance of victimhood. Derek had intentionally messed up his hair to look disheveled and exhausted. He was wearing a faded, wrinkled t-shirt instead of his usual custom-tailored suits. Cassidy sat next to him, clutching a crumpled tissue, her eyes expertly reddened to simulate hours of weeping. She looked directly into the camera lens and began to speak in a shaky, fragile whisper. Cassidy told the hundreds of people watching that I had suffered a severe, terrifying mental breakdown. She claimed that without any warning or provocation, I had flown into a psychotic rage and violently kicked them out of the penthouse. She painted a vivid, horrifying picture of herself and her brother being thrown onto the freezing Chicago streets in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on their backs. She even had the audacity to twist the daycare incident, crying hysterically as she lied and said I had tried to physically attack her brother when he bravely attempted to rescue my dog from my temporary insanity. Then Derek took over the broadcast. He lowered his voice, adopting the tone of a deeply wounded but resilient entrepreneur. He looked into the camera and solemnly declared that my supposed mental breakdown was actually a calculated act of pure jealousy. He claimed his brilliant tech startup was finally on the verge of securing a massive multi-million-dollar venture capital investment. According to Derek, I realized I was about to lose control over him because he would soon be infinitely more successful and wealthy than I was. So in a desperate bid to sabotage his imminent success, I illegally canceled our lease, shut off the utilities, and tried to destroy his life. It was a masterpiece of gaslighting. As we watched the video stream, the live viewer count rapidly climbed. Heart and crying face emojis floated up the side of the screen in a continuous stream. In the comment section, Brenda was actively fanning the flames. She typed paragraph after paragraph in the chat confirming their lies and calling me a dangerous, unstable woman who needed to be institutionalized. She urged all of their friends and extended family members to share the video and expose my true nature to the world. Within 10 minutes, the digital mob was mobilized. My personal cell phone began vibrating against the wooden table with aggressive intensity. First came the text messages, then the voicemails pouring in from people I had hosted for Thanksgiving dinners and bought expensive Christmas gifts for. Derek's aunt sent a long, blistering message, calling me a pathetic gold digger who was furious that Derek was finally outgrowing me. A cousin I had helped get a job interview left a venomous voicemail screaming that I was a monster for leaving a young woman like Cassidy out on the street. The notifications stacked up on my screen, a relentless barrage of hatred and misplaced outrage from an extended family that was entirely brainwashed by a 34-year-old unemployed man. Jamal watched my phone light up repeatedly. He looked at me, his expression tight with concern. He asked if I was going to respond or post a statement to defend myself. He offered to let me use the documents in his folder to publicly prove they were lying. I looked down at the flood of hateful messages, feeling a brief, sharp sting of betrayal. But that feeling instantly evaporated, replaced by absolute crystal-clear focus. I reached out, picked up my phone, and turned on the Do Not Disturb feature. The screen went completely black. I told Jamal that arguing with a digital mob was a waste of time. I did not need to win an argument in the comment section of a Facebook video. Social media sympathy would not protect them from a federal indictment. I did not care what Derek's aunts or cousins thought of me, because none of those people were going to pay his legal bills when the truth finally caught up with him. I slid my laptop and the flash drive into my briefcase. I carefully picked up Jamal's manila folder, treating it like the loaded weapon it truly was, and tucked it safely beside my documents. We stood up from the booth. Jamal shook my hand, his grip firm and resolute. He told me he was heading straight to his lawyer's office to file the emergency asset freeze and finalize the divorce papers. We agreed to stay in contact only through the encrypted email server. I walked out of the 8th Street Cafe, the crisp afternoon air filling my lungs. I got into my car and drove away from the downtown shopping district. I did not drive back to my luxury hotel. I did not call my friends to cry about the smear campaign. Instead, I drove to the secure, heavily guarded plaza of the Regional Government Center. I parked my car, grabbed my briefcase, and walked confidently through the metal detectors of a massive federal building. Waiting for me in the sleek marble lobby was my personal attorney, Mr. Harrison. He was a sharp, no-nonsense legal professional whom I kept on retainer for my real estate and corporate investments. When I had called him on the drive over and briefly explained the situation, he instructed me to meet him here immediately so we could utilize the federal notary and secure communications rooms available to legal counsel. We checked into a private conference room on the 3rd floor. I sat down at the heavy oak table, opened my briefcase, and handed him the manila folder Jamal had provided. Mr. Harrison put on his reading glasses and methodically reviewed the documents. He did not gasp or express emotional shock. Like me, he operated strictly on data and the law. He traced the forged signature with his pen, looked at the stolen tax returns, and nodded once. He told me we needed to execute a synchronized lockdown on my identity before we even approached law enforcement. We opened my laptop and initiated a conference call. Within 20 minutes, we had directly contacted the security divisions of Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. I did not just place a standard credit freeze. Under Mr. Harrison's strict guidance, I filed an extended 7-year hard fraud alert on my Social Security number. I answered a series of rigorous security questions, confirming previous addresses, and closed auto loans to definitively prove my true identity. Once the hard fraud alert was officially placed, I received immediate email confirmations from all 3 bureaus. This meant my credit profile was now locked behind an impenetrable federal wall. Any financial institution attempting to process a loan or open a line of credit would be legally required to contact me directly at a verified phone number to confirm my authorization. Derek's access to my financial reputation was permanently incinerated. It felt like watching heavy steel vault doors slamming shut on his entire fraudulent operation. With my credit profile secured, we moved to the most critical target. We needed to intercept the $150,000 Small Business Administration loan before the funds were ever dispersed. Mr. Harrison bypassed the standard customer service hotlines and dialed a direct unlisted number for the executive fraud division of the bank handling the application. After a brief wait, a senior investigator named Agent Miller answered the line. Mr. Harrison formally introduced us and stated that we were reporting an active high-dollar identity theft case. I took the microphone and read off the specific application tracking number printed at the top of the PDF Jamal had given me. I heard the clacking of a keyboard on the other end of the line as Agent Miller pulled up the file. He asked if I was calling to verify my guarantor status for the tech startup. I stated clearly and unequivocally that I had never heard of the company, I had never authorized the use of my social security number, and the signature on the document was a complete forgery executed by my ex-boyfriend. Agent Miller's tone instantly shifted from administrative routine to deeply serious investigation. He asked me to verify my current residential address. I informed him that the luxury penthouse listed on the application was a property I had legally surrendered the day before. I explained the ongoing eviction process and how Derek was currently homeless, desperately trying to secure this government money to maintain his illusion of wealth. Agent Miller asked if I had any tangible proof of the forgery. I hit send on an encrypted email containing the high-resolution scans Jamal had discovered. I included the digital practice sheets where Cassidy had repeatedly attempted to perfectly copy my handwriting. I also attached a copy of the emergency restraining order the judge had granted me earlier that morning, legally documenting Derek's unstable and threatening behavior. There was a long silence on the line as Agent Miller reviewed the attachments. When he finally spoke again, the gravity of the situation echoed loudly in his voice. He explained that this was no longer a simple domestic dispute or a basic case of stolen credit cards. He told us that because Derek had submitted the application online using internet servers located in a different state, and because the requested funds were federally backed by the Small Business Administration, the legal parameters of the crime had escalated dramatically. Agent Miller stated that attempting to defraud a national bank and the federal government across state lines was not a minor misdemeanor. It was a severe federal offense. He informed me that this was now officially classified as a felony wire fraud case. The bank was legally obligated to halt the funding process immediately and hand the entire file over to federal authorities. He warned me that wire fraud carried a potential penalty of up to 20 years in federal prison, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation would be taking over the case. Agent Miller kept his word. Less than an hour after our phone call concluded, there was a sharp, authoritative knock on the heavy oak door of our conference room. A tall, sharply dressed man stepped inside, bypassing any casual pleasantries. He flashed a gold shield and federal credentials, introducing himself as Special Agent Reynolds from the White Collar Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The reality of the situation settled over the room with immense gravity. This was no longer a messy domestic dispute over a broken luxury apartment lease. My unemployed ex-boyfriend and his entitled sister had officially triggered a federal law enforcement response. I opened my laptop and turned the screen towards Special Agent Reynolds. I did not waste his time with emotional complaints about the breakup, the disrespectful treatment I had endured, or the ridiculous Facebook Live video currently spreading through their family. I operate strictly on data, and I gave him exactly what he needed to build a prosecution. I securely transferred the encrypted file folder, containing every single piece of evidence Jamal had provided. I guided the agent through the forged W-2 forms, the falsified tax returns, and the digital practice sheets where Cassidy had meticulously perfected my signature. Then I pulled up my own communication logs. I showed Special Agent Reynolds the exact text messages where Derek had explicitly threatened my finances and demanded I pay for his sister's lifestyle. I provided the high-definition security footage from the dog daycare center to establish his escalating physical aggression and sheer desperation. Special Agent Reynolds reviewed the material with clinical precision, his eyes scanning the documents. He noted that the quality and organization of the evidence were exceptional. He explicitly stated that having the forged documents intercepted before the funds were cleared saved his cyber investigation team weeks of preliminary subpoena work. The paper trail was absolute perfection. The agent then sat down across from me and explained the specific ruthless mechanics of federal wire fraud. He clarified that submitting the forged SBA application using the internet across state lines was already a severe crime. But the Bureau did not just want an indictment. They wanted an absolutely bulletproof conviction. To ensure Derek and Cassidy faced the maximum federal penalties without any opportunity to claim ignorance or blame a computer glitch, the authorities needed them to take the final irrevocable step in the criminal process. They needed Derek to actively attempt to receive and accept the fraudulent funds into a bank account he controlled. Special Agent Reynolds leaned forward, resting his hands on the conference table, and gave me a direct, strict order. He told me I had to maintain absolute radio silence. I was legally permitted to keep the restraining order in place for my physical safety, but I was strictly forbidden from blocking Derek's phone number. His text messages were now considered active evidence in an ongoing federal investigation. More importantly, Special Agent Reynolds instructed me to completely ignore the massive social media smear campaign Brenda was orchestrating. I could not post a defense. I could not warn anyone in his family about the impending legal disaster. I could not do a single thing that might indicate I knew about the Small Business Administration loan. The agent explained that Derek needed to believe his brilliant, manipulative plan was working perfectly. If I tipped him off, he might panic, cancel the bank application, and attempt to physically destroy the hard drives in Brenda's basement before a search warrant could be executed. I had to let him feel victorious. I had to let him believe he had outsmarted me and that the bank was actively processing his $150,000. Mr. Harrison, my attorney, agreed entirely with the strategy, confirming it was the smartest legal play to ensure maximum accountability. We concluded the meeting, and I walked out of the federal building feeling an incredible sense of clarity. I was no longer a victim fighting an entitled ex-partner. I was an active participant in a federal sting operation. I got back into my car, the quiet hum of the engine offering a brief moment of peace. I turned off the Do Not Disturb feature on my phone to ensure I was receiving any potential text evidence for the agent. The screen immediately lit up with a barrage of notifications from the ongoing Facebook drama, but one specific text message caught my eye instantly. It was from Derek, sent just 2 minutes ago. I opened the message expecting another empty threat. Instead, it was a message dripping with sheer, unadulterated arrogance. He sent a picture of himself holding a glass of cheap wine in his mother's basement, grinning smugly at the camera as if he had just conquered the world. Below the picture, he typed a message that permanently sealed his own fate. He wrote, "My investors just called, and the capital is fully approved. The funding hits my account on Friday. You walked away from a multi-million-dollar empire over a utility bill. Watch me win. You are going to regret leaving me for the rest of your life." I stared at the text message, the sheer arrogance of his words washing over me. He was sitting on a stained futon in his mother's unfinished basement, surrounded by trash bags full of his belongings, and he genuinely believed he had just conquered the corporate world. I did not reply. I did exactly what Special Agent Reynolds had instructed. I took a screenshot of his confession, noting his explicit anticipation of the fraudulent funds, and forwarded it directly to the encrypted federal email portal. Then I sat back and let them completely destroy themselves. Over the next 48 hours, the delusion inside Brenda's house reached a fever pitch. Through the family grapevines, mutual acquaintances, and their incessant social media posting, I was able to watch their impending train wreck unfold in real time. Brenda was absolutely ecstatic. Her golden boy had supposedly just secured a massive venture capital investment. In her eyes, the $150,000 federal loan was not an act of felony wire fraud. It was absolute validation. It was proof that her son was the misunderstood genius she always claimed he was, and that I was just the bitter ex-girlfriend who was too small-minded to support his vision. To celebrate this imaginary triumph, Brenda decided they needed to host a massive event. She began planning what she called a startup launch and family victory dinner. She did not book a table at a local restaurant. She went straight to the Oak Ridge Country Club, one of the most exclusive and expensive venues in the Chicago suburbs. She sent out lavish digital invitations to every single aunt, uncle, and cousin who had watched their pathetic Facebook Live broadcast. The invitation promised an evening of fine dining, top-tier champagne, and a keynote speech from Derek about his new multi-million-dollar enterprise. It was a thinly veiled excuse to gather an audience and gloat over my perceived defeat. Cassidy was equally consumed by the fantasy. Derek had explicitly promised her a massive cut of the incoming government funds to keep her quiet about the forged signatures on the loan application. Cassidy decided that as the sister of a newly minted tech CEO, she needed to look the part for the country club dinner. But there was a significant problem. I had cut off her access to my money, and Jamal had already initiated the preliminary freeze on their primary assets. She was entirely out of cash. Instead of wearing something she already owned, Cassidy made a decision of staggering financial stupidity. Relying entirely on the promise that the SBA loan money would be deposited on Friday morning, she applied for a predatory high-interest personal loan online. She used the title of her luxury SUV as collateral to secure $10,000 in instant cash. The interest rate was astronomical, designed to trap desperate borrowers, but Cassidy did not care. She genuinely believed she would just pay it off in full the second Derek's federal funds cleared the bank. She immediately went on a reckless shopping spree. She posted Instagram stories from luxury boutiques downtown, showing off a $3,000 designer gown she purchased specifically for the dinner. She booked expensive salon treatments, bought new shoes, and paraded around the city as if she had just won the lottery. They were entirely disconnected from reality. They were planning a victory lap and spending wildly, relying entirely on phantom money from a federal bank that was currently building a criminal indictment against them. Derek even posted a photo of himself trying on a new tuxedo, captioning it with a quote about how true leaders rise from the ashes of toxic relationships. I watched all of this unfold with clinical detachment. The trap was perfectly set. The bait had been completely swallowed. All we had to do was wait for Friday. I was sitting in my hotel room on Wednesday evening reviewing data analytics reports for work when my secure messaging application chimed. I opened the encrypted channel, fully expecting an update from the federal agent regarding the wire transfer sting. Instead, it was a message from Jamal. He had been quietly working behind the scenes with his divorce attorney, meticulously monitoring every single financial move his soon-to-be ex-wife was making before the final asset freeze took total effect. His message was brief, but it signaled a massive escalation in their reckless behavior and gave us the perfect leverage for the upcoming party. I stared at the screen as the words sank in. Jamal wrote, "They just paid the $5,000 country club deposit with my joint checking account." I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, reading his text message over and over again. $5,000. Cassidy had just stolen another $5,000 directly from their shared checking account to pay the non-refundable deposit for a victory party celebrating a massive federal crime. I immediately replied to Jamal, asking if he needed me to transfer him emergency funds to cover his daily expenses. He responded a minute later, telling me not to worry. His lawyer had instructed him to let the transaction clear. That $5,000 charge was the final nail in her coffin. It provided absolute, undeniable proof of her financial recklessness right before the judge officially froze their marital assets. Thursday morning arrived with a sharp chill in the Chicago air. This was the day the trap was scheduled to snap shut. At exactly 10 in the morning, my secure messaging application chimed. It was an audio file forwarded by Special Agent Reynolds, along with a brief message stating that the preliminary sting operation was a complete success. I put in my wireless earbuds, locked the door to my hotel room, and pressed play. The recording began with the standard automated beep of a federal wiretap. Then the crisp, professional voice of an undercover FBI agent filled my ears. The agent introduced himself as a senior compliance officer from the Small Business Administration Disbursement Department. He asked to speak with Derek regarding the final release of the $150,000 commercial loan. There was a brief pause, and then Derek's voice came through the line. He sounded breathless, eager, and dripping with unearned arrogance. He aggressively demanded to know why the funds had not hit his account yet, claiming his investors were getting impatient. The undercover agent did not react to Derek's rude tone. Instead, he executed a flawless legal interrogation disguised as a routine banking procedure. The agent explained that because of the large sum, they needed verbal confirmation of a few key details before the wire transfer could be legally authorized. First, the agent asked Derek to confirm his identity and his sole ownership of the startup company. Derek puffed up his chest, his voice booming through the phone as he proudly spelled out his full legal name and explicitly stated that he was the absolute sole owner and primary beneficiary of the funds. Then came the crucial moment. The agent shifted the topic to the guarantor section of the application. He asked Derek to verify my identity. He read my full name, my social security number, and my previous address aloud. Derek confirmed every single detail without a second of hesitation. Finally, the undercover agent asked the golden question. He said, "Sir, for our fraud prevention records, can you verbally confirm that the guarantor Natalie willingly reviewed this contract and physically signed this document in your presence?" I held my breath listening to the recording. Derek did not stutter. He did not show a single ounce of guilt or hesitation. He confidently and firmly replied, "Yes, she signed it right in front of me. She is fully on board and supports the business venture 100%. The undercover agent simply replied, "Thank you for your verbal confirmation, sir. The compliance check is now complete. The funds have been scheduled for release tomorrow morning. Have a wonderful day." The recording clicked and went dead. I pulled my earbuds out, feeling a rush of cold satisfaction. Derek had just explicitly confessed to federal identity theft and wire fraud on a recorded line with a federal agent. He had verified the forged signature. He had claimed sole ownership of the illicit funds. The legal loop was completely closed. There were no loopholes left for him to squeeze through. He could not claim Cassidy did it without his knowledge. He could not claim it was a computer error or a misunderstanding. The crime was officially locked in, and the FBI had everything they needed to secure a felony conviction and put him away for years. While Derek was busy celebrating his successful phone call with the fake bank officer, a very different scene was unfolding across town. Thursday afternoon, Cassidy left her house to pick up the $3,000 designer gown she had bought with her predatory loan. She thought she was preparing for the best weekend of her life, but the moment her luxury SUV pulled out of the driveway, Jamal walked into their master bedroom. He did not make a sound. He opened his closet and pulled out a large canvas duffel bag. While his wife was out buying expensive shoes for a party built on lies, Jamal was quietly packing his belongings, preparing to permanently walk out of a marriage that had cost him his life savings. He moved methodically, stripping the room of anything that truly belonged to him. He packed his clothes, his important financial documents, and the few sentimental items Cassidy had not yet sold to fund her shopping addiction. He did not leave a dramatic note on the bed. He did not trash the house in a fit of rage or sorrow. He simply erased his presence from her life with the exact same cold, calculated precision we had used to build our entire legal case against her toxic family. After driving away from the house they once shared, Jamal did not go to a bar to drown his sorrows. He did not call his friends to complain. He drove his car straight into the heart of the downtown Chicago financial district and parked beneath a towering glass skyscraper. On the 42nd floor, sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, was Eleanor Crawford. Eleanor was one of the most feared and respected family law attorneys in the state of Illinois. She specialized in high-net-worth divorces, hidden asset tracing, and financial recovery. Jamal had chosen her specifically because she was known for being utterly ruthless in the courtroom. Jamal sat down in the plush leather chair opposite Eleanor and handed her the thick manila folder. It contained the forged 401k withdrawal documents, the secret credit card statements, and the recent screenshot of the $5,000 country club deposit drawn from his joint checking account. Eleanor reviewed the files on her dual monitors, her expression cold and analytical. She did not offer sympathetic platitudes about heartbreak or failed communication. She offered total legal warfare. Eleanor told Jamal that Cassidy had committed gross dissipation of marital assets and severe financial fraud. She immediately drafted an ex parte emergency motion for a temporary restraining order on all joint bank accounts, investment portfolios, and property deeds. Eleanor explained the precise mechanics of the trap. Because they had documented proof of Cassidy actively draining funds for non-marital purposes, a family court judge would sign the freeze order immediately. The moment the order was filed and served to the banking institutions, Cassidy would be completely financially paralyzed. Her debit cards would decline at the cash register. She would not be able to withdraw a single dollar, transfer any funds, or take out any more loans against their shared assets. She was going to be cut off from her financial lifeblood right in the middle of her delusional shopping spree. Eleanor printed out a thick stack of legal documents and placed them on the desk. On top was the formal petition for dissolution of marriage. The grounds for divorce were not listed as irreconcilable differences. They were explicitly listed as criminal breach of fiduciary duty and financial abuse. Eleanor handed Jamal a heavy silver pen. She asked him if he was absolutely sure he wanted to execute the nuclear option, reminding him that there was no turning back once the documents were filed. Jamal did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He looked at the paperwork, thought about the 10 years of hard work Cassidy had stolen from him to fund her fake Instagram life, and signed his name on the dotted line. He slid the papers back across the desk. The marriage was officially terminated, and the financial trap was fully armed. While Jamal was executing his legal strike downtown, I was busy transitioning out of my temporary hotel room. I had just signed a lease on a gorgeous, ultra-modern luxury condo overlooking Lake Michigan. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, top-tier building security, and absolutely zero memories of Derek. I spent the afternoon unpacking my clothes, setting up my home office, and making sure Apollo was comfortable in his new space. I was enjoying the peace and quiet, knowing that the federal sting operation was progressing perfectly and the endgame was rapidly approaching. Later that evening, I went down to the lobby to check my new mailbox. I had forwarded my mail from the old penthouse to my new address earlier in the week to ensure I did not miss any important corporate documents. As I sifted through the standard stack of utility bills and business magazines, my hand brushed against something thick and highly textured. It was a heavy, oversized envelope made of premium cardstock. The edges were lined with shimmering gold foil, and my name was written across the front in elaborate looping calligraphy. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It belonged to Brenda. I stood in the brightly lit lobby staring at the envelope in complete disbelief. I had legally evicted her son, blocked her phone number, and completely cut off their financial supply. They had spent the last 3 days dragging my name through the mud on social media, accusing me of having a psychotic break and trying to ruin their lives. Yet here was a piece of physical mail from the matriarch of the family, sent directly to my newly forwarded address. I slid my finger under the gold-foiled flap and broke the wax seal. I pulled out a heavy embossed invitation card. It was an official invitation to the Oak Ridge Country Club for the startup launch and family victory dinner scheduled for tomorrow night. But it was not just a generic mass-mailed invitation. Tucked inside the fold of the thick card was a handwritten note from Brenda herself. The words were written with such poisonous arrogance and complete detachment from reality that I actually let out a sharp laugh right there in the lobby. The note was penned in Brenda's heavy, sloping cursive, pressing so hard into the thick paper that it left deep indentations on the back. It read, "Come see what a real man looks like when he succeeds without you. Do not worry, we will save you a seat at the back." It was a masterclass in petty vindictive manipulation. She had intentionally tracked down my newly forwarded residential address, printed a custom VIP invitation on expensive cardstock, and mailed it with overnight shipping for the sole purpose of rubbing my nose in Derek's imaginary wealth. She genuinely believed that if I saw him standing in a rented designer tuxedo inside a prestigious country club surrounded by cheering relatives and an open bar paid for by a massive federal wire transfer, I would suddenly realize the massive mistake I had made. She wanted me to feel crushing, humiliating regret. She wanted me to witness his crowning moment and beg for a second chance to be part of his life. Under normal circumstances, receiving a mocking invitation from a toxic ex-boyfriend's mother would warrant an immediate trip to the nearest paper shredder. I would have tossed the gold-foiled envelope into the recycling bin, blocked her address, and never given it a single second of thought. But these were not normal circumstances at all. I knew exactly what was scheduled to happen at that specific country club tomorrow night. I knew that the $150,000 they were prematurely celebrating was a felony wire fraud trap perfectly designed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And I knew that Derek had just explicitly confirmed his guilt on a recorded federal wiretap earlier that exact same morning. This was not going to be a startup launch party. It was going to be a beautifully orchestrated, highly public criminal takedown, and I had absolutely no intention of missing the greatest show of my life. I walked into my new kitchen, placed the luxurious invitation on the sleek quartz island, and pulled out my cell phone. I opened my encrypted messaging application and typed a quick, detailed message to Jamal. I told him about the VIP invitation, the expensive gold foil, and the mocking handwritten note from Brenda. I asked him a simple strategic question. I wrote they reserved a seat for me to watch Derek succeed. Would you like to be my +1 to the main event? Jamal replied less than a minute later. His response was ice cold and perfectly aligned with my own analytical mindset. He wrote, I would not miss it for the world. My lawyer just confirmed the emergency asset freeze takes full legal effect at exactly 5 o'clock tomorrow evening. Cassidy will not even know her credit cards are entirely frozen until she tries to buy a drink at the country club bar. RSVP for 2. Let us give them an audience. I smiled, opened my personal email account, and typed in the RSVP address, listed at the bottom of Brenda's lavish card. I did not write a long, angry paragraph defending myself. I did not demand an apology for the note or comment on the ridiculous Facebook Live smear campaign they had launched. I kept my response entirely professional, completely brief, and acted exactly like a defeated woman who had finally accepted her lower place in their hierarchy. I wrote thank you for the generous invitation. Please confirm attendance for 2 guests, Natalie and Jamal. We look forward to witnessing Derek's incredible success. I hit send, locked my phone screen, and went back to happily organizing my new apartment. I could only imagine the absolute chaos that single email caused when it landed directly in Brenda's inbox. I later found out through the active family grapevine exactly how they reacted to my message. When Brenda saw my name pop up on her phone screen, she shrieked and immediately called Derek into the living room. They stared at the email, initially confused by the pairing of my name with Jamal. They knew Jamal and Cassidy were having some marital issues, though Cassidy had not yet returned home from her shopping spree to discover Jamal's empty closet and missing belongings. But in their deeply delusional state, they quickly spun my RSVP into a massive ego boost for Derek. To them, my willingness to show up at their victory dinner meant only one thing. It meant I had seen the viral video, realized Derek was about to be a powerful millionaire, and was crawling back to beg for his forgiveness. They assumed I had reached out to Jamal to secure a ride because I was too humiliated and broken to walk into the venue alone. Derek puffed out his chest, bragging loudly to his mother that my appearance at the country club was the ultimate proof of his absolute superiority. He told Brenda to call the venue and upgrade the champagne package, eager to show off his fraudulent wealth right in my face. They were absolutely thrilled by the development. They thought they had won the war and finally broke my spirit. They thought I was coming to grovel at his feet. They had absolutely no idea that Jamal and I were not coming to the party as defeated exes, but as the silent architects of their total and permanent destruction. Friday arrived with a heavy electric tension in the air. The morning passed in a blur of corporate meetings and standard data reviews, but my mind was entirely focused on the evening ahead. At exactly 5 o'clock, Jamal sent a single one-word text message. Frozen. His attorney had successfully executed the legal order. Cassidy's financial lifeline was officially severed right as she was likely getting her hair professionally styled for the big event. I closed my laptop, walked into my bedroom, and opened my closet to select my armor for the night. I reached past the conservative cocktail dresses and pulled out a stunning, floor-length emerald green silk gown. I had purchased it over a year ago for a corporate gala. I remembered the exact look of disdain on Derek's face when I first tried it on. He had sneered, telling me the sharp, structured silhouette and the bold color made me look far too intimidating and aggressive. He demanded I wear something softer, something pastel, that did not draw attention away from his fragile ego. I had left the emerald dress hanging in the back of my closet ever since, manipulated into hiding my own confidence. Tonight it was the only acceptable choice. I slipped the dress on the cool silk draping perfectly against my skin. I paired it with tall black heels and styled my hair in a sleek, elegant sweep. I applied my makeup with calm, methodical precision. I did not look like a broken woman crawling back to beg for a second chance. I looked like an executive walking into a hostile boardroom takeover. I walked over to my desk and picked up a heavy manila folder. Inside was a printed copy of the email confirmation I had received from Special Agent Reynolds just an hour prior. The federal wiretap was fully processed, the fraud was officially confirmed, and the FBI agents were actively mobilizing for their strike. I slid the folder under my arm, grabbed my clutch, and went down to the lobby to wait for my ride. Jamal pulled up to the front doors of my building in his sleek black sedan. When I opened the passenger door and stepped inside, I was struck by the total transformation in his demeanor. The exhausted, betrayed husband I had met at the coffee shop was completely gone. In his place sat a man who had entirely reclaimed his power and his dignity. Jamal was wearing a sharply tailored charcoal gray suit with a crisp white shirt and a solid black tie. He looked immaculate, professional, and completely untouchable. Resting on the center console between us was his own manila folder identical to mine. His folder contained the finalized divorce petition, the signed emergency asset freeze order, and the undeniable paper trail proving Cassidy had stolen $80,000 from his retirement account. We did not exchange nervous chatter. We did not need to hype each other up or practice what we were going to say. We simply shared a brief, knowing nod. Jamal put the car in drive, and we headed toward the affluent suburbs. The drive took 45 minutes, the city skyline fading into sprawling manicured estates and towering oak trees. As we navigated the winding roads leading to the Oak Ridge Country Club, a profound sense of calm settled over me. This was the culmination of days of meticulous planning and silent endurance. We had let them dig their own graves, handed them the shovels, and now we were just arriving to watch them fall in. We turned onto the grand, sweeping driveway of the country club. The venue was absurdly opulent, boasting massive stone columns, perfectly manicured topiary gardens, and a fleet of luxury vehicles lined up near the entrance. It was sickening to know that the deposit for this lavish setting was paid for with money stolen directly from the man sitting next to me. Jamal pulled up to the valet stand and handed his keys to the attendant. We stepped out of this car, the cool evening breeze catching the hem of my silk dress. We walked side by side up the wide stone steps leading to the main entrance, our footsteps echoing with absolute purpose. The greeter at the front desk smiled warmly, asking for our party name. I told her we were the VIP guests for the startup launch dinner. She checked her list, her eyes widening slightly in recognition, and pointed us down a long, warmly lit corridor lined with expensive oil paintings. As we walked down the luxurious hallway, the soft background music of the country club began to fade, replaced by a much louder, more arrogant sound. We stopped just outside the heavy double oak doors of the private dining hall. From the other side of the wood, we could hear the distinct clinking of crystal champagne flutes, followed by the loud, booming sound of 50 people erupting into a massive round of applause. We stood perfectly still, letting the thunderous applause wash over the thick wooden doors. Through a narrow gap between the hinges, we had a clear, unobstructed view of the absolute spectacle unfolding inside the private dining hall. The room was dripping with unearned extravagance paid for entirely by Cassidy's stolen funds and Brenda's depleted savings accounts. 50 extended family members were seated at a long U-shaped banquet table draped in heavy white silk linens. Massive floral centerpieces of imported white roses and hydrangeas blocked out the sightlines, while uniformed waitstaff quietly poured expensive vintage champagne into crystal flutes. At the very head of the table, standing directly under a glowing crystal chandelier, was Derek. He was wearing the rented designer tuxedo he had bragged about online, though the fit was slightly off around the shoulders. He held his champagne flute high in the air, a smug, self-satisfied grin plastered across his face. As the applause died down, he tapped his glass with a silver spoon, the sharp ringing demanding total silence from his captive audience. He cleared his throat, adjusted his bow tie, and launched into a speech that was so profoundly arrogant it bordered on pure psychological comedy. He puffed out his chest and spoke about the grueling, misunderstood journey of a visionary tech entrepreneur. He claimed he had spent the last 2 years working relentlessly in the corporate trenches, sacrificing sleep and personal comfort to develop a proprietary data algorithm that was going to completely disrupt the financial sector. He conveniently left out the reality that his trenches consisted of my custom leather sofa, and his algorithm was nothing more than hours spent screaming at teenagers in multiplayer video games using my business-tier internet connection. Then his tone shifted dramatically. He lowered his voice, adopting a fake, rehearsed tone of somber reflection. He told the silent, captivated room that the road to massive wealth was lonely, and that building a multi-million-dollar empire required cutting off dead weight. He looked directly at his mother and stated that true leaders inevitably outgrow small-minded people. He explicitly mentioned how he recently had to walk away from a highly toxic, abusive relationship because his ex-girlfriend simply could not handle his towering ambition. He claimed I was deeply intimidated by his brilliant mind and had tried to financially sabotage his startup out of pure bitter jealousy. He declared that the $150,000 in federal capital hitting his business account tomorrow morning was the ultimate proof that the universe rewards the righteous. The sheer delusion of a man proudly bragging about committing federal wire fraud to a room full of people was staggering. Seated immediately to his right was Brenda. She was dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, weeping genuine tears of overwhelming pride. She wore an overly formal, dark blue sequined gown, nodding enthusiastically at every single lie her son fed the room. She kept interrupting him with soft, dramatic praises, whispering about how he was the pride of the entire family, and how he had survived such a dark period with me. To Derek's left sat Cassidy. She looked like a cartoon caricature of new wealth. She was wearing the $3,000 designer gown she had bought using predatory loans, her hair professionally styled into stiff, unnatural waves. She was not even paying attention to the emotional climax of her brother's speech. Instead, she had her wrist extended toward a group of younger cousins, aggressively showing off a massive, glittering diamond tennis bracelet. She was soaking in their gasps of admiration, completely oblivious to the fact that the man who had funded her entire existence was standing right outside the door. She had not even noticed Jamal was missing. She was too busy pretending to be a millionaire. The room was entirely captivated by the illusion. Aunts and uncles were murmuring their approval, shaking their heads in deep sympathy when Derek mentioned my supposed toxicity. They were drinking the expensive wine, eating the prime rib, and celebrating the birth of a fake tech empire funded by stolen identities and broken federal laws. Derek raised his glass one final time, his voice booming over the venue sound system. He proposed a grand toast to the future, to family loyalty, and to the massive success that was waiting for him at the bank tomorrow. The crowd raised their glasses in unison, echoing his cheer. It was the absolute peak of his lifelong delusion. It was the exact moment he felt the most powerful, the most validated, and the most legally untouchable. And that was the exact moment Jamal placed his hand firmly against the solid brass handle of the right door, while I placed my hand securely on the left. We pushed, and the heavy oak doors of the dining room swung open. The heavy oak doors swung wide open, hitting the brass stops with a loud, resounding thud that instantly cut through the applause. Every single head in the private dining room snapped toward the entrance simultaneously. The vibrant, excited energy of the party evaporated in a split second, replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. I stepped over the threshold, the rich emerald silk of my gown sweeping across the polished hardwood floor. Jamal walked right beside me, his charcoal gray suit radiating an aura of absolute authority. We did not look like two broken, defeated exes crawling back to beg for forgiveness. We looked like the grim reapers of their financial destruction, arriving to collect a massive debt. The visual shock alone was enough to paralyze the room. The extended family members who had just spent the last 10 minutes cheering for my supposed downfall sat frozen in their seats with their champagne glasses suspended halfway to their mouths. I scanned the room, making direct eye contact with the aunts and cousins who had left me venomous voicemails. One by one, they averted their eyes, suddenly deeply uncomfortable with the reality standing right in front of them. At the head of the table, Brenda's jaw actually dropped. She gripped the edge of the white silk tablecloth, her face turning a pale, sickly shade of white. She had expected me to show up alone wearing sweatpants and crying, desperate for her son to take me back. Instead, I was standing tall, looking better than I ever had during the 2 years I funded her son's life. But the most dramatic reaction came from Cassidy. When her eyes locked onto Jamal, the smug, arrogant smile completely vanished from her face. She dropped her wrist instantly, hiding the $3,000 diamond tennis bracelet under the table. She stared at the man whose life savings she had just stolen, her eyes wide with sudden, terrifying panic. She finally noticed that he was not looking at her with love or sadness. He was looking at her like she was a complete stranger. Derek, however, was entirely blinded by his own towering ego. It took him a few seconds to process the intrusion, but his sheer delusion quickly overpowered any sense of caution. He looked at my designer dress and Jamal's tailored suit, and his twisted mind somehow interpreted our sharp appearance as a desperate attempt to impress him. He genuinely believed we had dressed up to prove our worth to his new imaginary empire. A slow, incredibly arrogant smirk spread across his face. He set his champagne flute down on the table, picked up the wireless microphone he had been using for his speech, and stepped away from his chair. He walked to the center of the room, positioning himself directly under the crystal chandelier, wanting to make sure every single person heard his moment of ultimate triumph. He spoke into the microphone, his voice echoing loudly off the wood-paneled walls. "Well, look who finally decided to show up." He paused, letting a few of his loyal cousins chuckle nervously in the background. "I guess the reality of paying your own bills finally hit you." He pointed directly at me, his tone dripping with condescension. "You realize that walking away from a visionary was the stupidest financial mistake of your entire life. You watched the broadcast, you saw the success, and now you are here hoping to get a piece of the pie." He took a few steps closer, soaking in the attention of his captive audience. He shook his head in mock pity. "I warned you, Natalie. I told you I was going to be a millionaire, and you would deeply regret cutting my internet off. But it is too late. My investors approved the capital this morning. The wire transfer is locked. So I'm sorry to break it to you, Natalie, but the $150,000 is entirely mine. You do not get to come crawling back just because I finally made it to the top." He stood there grinning from ear to ear, waiting for me to break down. He waited for me to yell, to argue, to deny his claims, or to beg for a second chance in front of his entire family. He wanted a dramatic, emotional scene to prove his dominance to the room. I did not give him one single ounce of emotion. I did not raise my voice. I did not even look at him. I simply broke eye contact, completely ignoring his existence, and began walking calmly across the dining room floor. Jamal broke off from my side, walking with slow, deliberate steps, directly toward the head of the table where his wife was trembling. I kept my trajectory straight toward the corner of the room, heading directly for the hired entertainment. The country club DJ was standing behind his soundboard, looking completely terrified by the unfolding family drama. I walked right up to his table, reached into my clutch, and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. I placed it flat on his mixing board. I did not ask for permission. I calmly reached over, unplugged the auxiliary cable from his laptop, and firmly plugged it directly into the headphone jack of my own cell phone. I tapped the glowing screen of my phone, selecting the audio file I had queued up just moments before walking into the country club. I pushed the volume slider all the way to maximum. The professional sound system in the private dining hall was built for high-fidelity wedding speeches and heavy dance music. It was incredibly powerful. It easily carried the crisp, unmistakable sound of a ringing telephone across the massive room, overriding the soft background music that had been playing just seconds before. The DJ backed away from his mixing board, raising his hands in a gesture of complete surrender. Every single person in the room was staring at me, thoroughly confused, waiting for a song to play. Instead, the ringing stopped. A sharp, highly authoritative voice boomed from the overhead speakers, vibrating through the floorboards. It was the bank fraud investigator. He did not sound like a friendly customer service representative congratulating a new client. He sounded like a man delivering a legal death sentence. The voice echoed through the silent room with absolute clarity. "Mr. Derek, your loan is denied due to confirmed identity theft and federal wire fraud. Your file has been officially transferred to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for immediate criminal prosecution." The audio cut out with a sharp click. The heavy, suffocating silence that followed was absolute. 50 people were simultaneously holding their breath. I calmly unplugged my phone from the auxiliary cable, coiled the wire, and slipped it back into my evening clutch. Derek was still standing in the exact center of the room, directly under the glowing crystal chandelier. His arm was still partially raised from his arrogant toast to his fake investors. The blood entirely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent white. His eyes widened in absolute terror as his brain scrambled to process how his closely guarded criminal secret was currently echoing through a venue he had invited his entire family to. His fingers went completely limp. The crystal champagne flute slipped from his grip and plummeted toward the hardwood floor. It hit the polished wood with a violent crash. The flute shattered into hundreds of glittering pieces, sending expensive champagne splashing across the toes of his rented leather shoes. The sharp sound of breaking glass made several aunts physically jump in their seats, but nobody spoke a word. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. The multi-million-dollar tech CEO he had spent the last 10 minutes pretending to be was instantly reduced to a terrified, unemployed criminal caught in the blinding headlights of his own lies. The spell of silence was suddenly broken by a hysterical screech from the head of the banquet table. Brenda shot up from her chair with so much force that it tipped over backward, crashing into a tall floral pedestal. She pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at my face across the room. She screamed that it was a fake. Her voice cracked with pure, desperate denial. She yelled to the room that the audio file was completely fabricated. She claimed I was using artificial intelligence to frame him. She frantically told her relatives not to listen to me, swearing that I was a jealous, vindictive hacker trying to ruin his big night because I could not stand to see him succeed without my financial support. Brenda looked wildly around the room, pleading with her siblings and cousins to believe the illusion they had all bought into just moments ago. She grabbed Derek by the arm, shaking his tuxedo jacket violently. She demanded he tell them it was fake, begging him to explain that it was just computer software I had manipulated. But Derek could not speak. He could not even look at his mother. He knew it was not artificial intelligence. He recognized the voice of the investigator, and he knew his signature was sitting on a forged federal document currently in the possession of the FBI. The family members were no longer nodding in sympathy. They were whispering frantically, exchanging horrified glances and pulling their phones out of their pockets. The The house of cards was rapidly collapsing in real time, but the absolute destruction of their toxic dynamic was not finished yet. I had delivered my blow legally and publicly, incinerating Derek's false narrative. Now it was time for the second act of our coordinated strike. While Brenda continued to shriek about artificial intelligence, and Derek stared blankly at the shattered crystal around his feet, Jamal finally made his move. He walked past the whispering cousins and the stunned waitstaff. He did not yell. He did not look angry. He simply possessed an aura of cold, terrifying finality. He stepped directly up to the head table, completely ignoring the chaotic mother and son, and turned his full attention to the woman wearing the $3,000 designer dress. Jamal stopped directly in front of Cassidy, looking down at his trembling wife. The $3,000 designer gown she wore suddenly looked like a cheap, ridiculous costume. She shrank back into her plush dining chair, her eyes darting nervously toward her brother, then toward her mother, silently pleading for someone to intervene. But Brenda and Derek were entirely consumed by their own impending legal doom. Cassidy was completely on her own, isolated by her own arrogance. Jamal did not raise his hand. He did not raise his voice to a scream. He simply raised the thick manila folder he had been carrying and tossed it directly onto her pristine white china plate. The heavy stack of documents landed with a solid smack, knocking over her crystal water glass. Water spilled across the expensive silk tablecloth, but nobody moved to clean it up. Cassidy jumped, staring at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. Jamal leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the table. He spoke with a voice so sharp and clear that it easily cut through the murmurs of the stunned family members. He said, "And while we are talking about fraud, tell your family how you stole $80,000 from my retirement to buy that bracelet." The collective gasp from the room was immediate and audible. Aunts and uncles who had just been admiring her jewelry minutes ago now stared at her in absolute horror. Cassidy shook her head frantically, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face. She stammered, her voice shaking, trying to formulate a convincing lie, but her throat was completely dry. Jamal did not give her a single second to construct a defense. He reached over and flipped the folder open, exposing the highlighted financial statements and the forged hardship withdrawal forms for the entire table to witness. He systematically dismantled her entire fake reality right in front of the audience she cared about the most. He explained in brutal detail how she had secretly racked up $60,000 in credit card debt to fund her pathetic fake lifestyle on social media. He detailed how she had intercepted the mail, bypassed the security questions on his brokerage account, and forged his signature to drain the money he had spent 10 long years saving for their future. Cassidy began to sob, thick black mascara running down her cheeks, ruining her pristine makeup. She reached out with trembling hands, trying to grab Jamal by the sleeve of his tailored suit, begging him to stop talking. She cried out, asking if they could just go home and discuss this in private like a normal married couple. Jamal pulled his arm back sharply, his expression turning to pure ice. He reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out the second stack of legal documents. He dropped the divorce papers directly on top of the financial statements. He looked down at her and delivered the final crushing blow to her manufactured life. He said, "My lawyer has frozen all your accounts. You have absolutely nothing." He explained that the emergency court order had gone into effect at exactly 5 o'clock that afternoon. Her debit cards were completely dead. The credit cards were locked. Cassidy stared at the divorce petition, the catastrophic legal reality of her situation finally piercing through her delusion. She realized that the stolen money she had used to pay the deposit for this very party was the last dollar she would ever touch. The high-interest predatory loan she took out for her designer dress was now entirely her own problem, and she had no way to pay it back. Cassidy burst into hysterical tears, burying her face in her hands, wailing loudly and uncontrollably in the middle of the luxurious country club dining room. The elegant victory dinner had completely devolved into an absolute nightmare. The golden boy was exposed as a federal criminal, and the family princess was exposed as a pathological thief. The extended family sat in stunned, horrified silence, watching the two siblings face the devastating financial and legal consequences of their own toxic actions. I stood near the DJ booth, watching the synchronized destruction of their empire. It was executed flawlessly. But a cornered animal is always the most dangerous. Derek had been standing motionless, his mind short-circuiting from the bank audio recording. But the sound of his sister wailing uncontrollably snapped him out of his paralyzed state. He looked at his mother sobbing, he looked at his sister humiliated, and then his eyes locked directly onto me. His sheer panic instantly mutated into blinding, violent rage. He could not accept that this was entirely his fault. He desperately needed a scapegoat. His face turned a deep, furious crimson. He let out a raw, guttural scream, his hands curling into tight fists. He screamed that I had ruined his life. Before anyone could react, Derek lunged forward, charging directly at me across the dining room floor with pure violence in his eyes. Derek lunged forward, charging directly at me across the dining room floor with pure violence in his eyes. He knocked over a heavy mahogany chair, his heavy rented shoes pounding against the polished hardwood floor. He had closed half the distance, his hands reaching out to physically grab me. His face twisted into an ugly mask of rage. But he never reached me. A massive commotion erupted from the opposite side of the room, instantly shattering his aggressive momentum. The heavy wooden service doors located just behind the lavish prime rib buffet station violently swung open. The sudden explosive noise caused several family members to scream in terror. Marching through the service entrance with absolute authority were three tall men wearing dark navy windbreakers. Stamped across their backs and chests in bold, bright yellow lettering were the letters FBI. Right behind them, 4 local Chicago police officers in full uniform flooded into the dining hall, their hands resting cautiously on their heavy utility belts. The lead federal agent was Special Agent Reynolds, the exact same man I had spoken with in the secure conference room 2 days prior. He did not look like a guest at a high-society country club dinner. He looked like a predator who had finally cornered his target. The agents moved with terrifying speed and flawless tactical precision. They bypassed the terrified aunts and uncles, marching straight past the extravagant floral centerpieces and the tiered dessert displays. Derek stopped dead in his tracks. He tried to take a step backward, his eyes darting frantically toward the main exit, but 2 local police officers had already moved to block the double oak doors Jamal and I had entered through. He was completely boxed in with absolutely nowhere to run. He stumbled backward until his shoulders hit the edge of the carving station. The silver heat lamps reflected off his sweaty forehead as he knocked a stack of expensive porcelain plates onto the floor, the ceramic shattering into pieces. Special Agent Reynolds stepped directly into his personal space, grabbing Derek firmly by the bicep of his rented tuxedo jacket. Derek let out a pathetic, high-pitched noise completely stripped of his arrogant bravado. He tried to pull his arm away weakly, claiming there had been a misunderstanding with his investors. But the agent's grip was like an iron vice. Special Agent Reynolds spoke in a loud, commanding voice that left absolutely no room for misinterpretation. He addressed Derek by his full legal name, officially placing him under federal arrest. As he swiftly spun Derek around and pushed him face first against the white silk tablecloth of the prime rib buffet, he began reciting the Miranda rights. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent declared, as he pulled Derek's arms roughly behind his back. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The heavy steel handcuffs came out of the agent's belt. The sharp mechanical click of the metal locking around Derek's wrists echoed loudly in the silent, horrified room. Special Agent Reynolds listed the official charges for the entire extended family to hear. He explicitly stated that Derek was being indicted for felony wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and attempting to defraud the United States federal government. The stark reality of the handcuffs clicking finally broke the spell that had paralyzed the room. Derek was hyperventilating, his cheek pressed against the cold buffet table next to a silver carving knife, completely humiliated in front of the audience he had desperately tried to impress just 5 minutes ago. But while Derek surrendered to the inevitable legal nightmare, Brenda completely lost her mind. She let out a blood-curdling scream that sounded like a wounded animal. She scrambled out from behind the head table, tripping over the hem of her dark blue sequined gown. She charged directly at the federal agents, flailing her manicured hands wildly in the air. She grabbed Special Agent Reynolds by the shoulder of his windbreaker, trying to physically pull him away from her son. She screamed that they were making a massive mistake, that her son was a brilliant and successful chief executive officer, and that they needed to arrest me instead for framing him. The local police officers reacted instantly to the physical threat. 2 officers stepped forward forcefully, prying Brenda's hands off the federal agent. They pushed her back, physically restraining her by her arms as she kicked and thrashed. Special Agent Reynolds slowly turned around. His expression hardened into absolute stone. He pointed a firm finger directly at Brenda's tear-streaked face and delivered a stark, unforgiving warning. He told her to step back and quiet down immediately, or she would be leaving the country club in handcuffs right next to her son for assaulting a federal officer and obstruction of justice. Brenda's mouth snapped shut. The threat of federal prison was the only thing powerful enough to pierce her profound delusion. She stumbled backward, her knees hitting the seat of her tipped-over chair, and collapsed onto the floor. She watched in total silence as the federal agents hauled her golden boy to his feet. The rest of the extended family reacted with pure, unadulterated self-preservation. The illusion of Derek the tech millionaire was entirely shattered, replaced by the horrifying reality of Derek the federal criminal. Nobody wanted to be interviewed by the FBI. Nobody wanted to be considered an accessory to wire fraud. One by one, the aunts, uncles, and cousins who had left me hateful voicemails quietly stood up from the banquet table. They avoided making eye contact with Brenda. They grabbed their evening coats and designer purses, slipping out the side doors of the dining hall like ghosts fleeing a sinking ship. The massive crowd of 50 loyal supporters evaporated in less than 2 minutes, leaving behind half-eaten plates of prime rib and the shattered remains of a crystal champagne flute. Special Agent Reynolds led Derek toward the main exit. As Derek was marched past me in handcuffs, he lifted his heavy head. His eyes met mine one final time. There was no arrogance left. There was no smug superiority. There was only the hollow, terrified stare of a man who finally realized his manipulative actions had real, inescapable consequences. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply looked right through him, offering him absolutely nothing. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind the agent, sealing his fate and removing him from my life forever. The dining hall was eerily quiet, save for Cassidy's continued pathetic sobbing at the head table, but the nightmare for the remaining family members was not over. The Oak Ridge Country Club was a luxury business, and they expected to be paid for the extravagant service they had just provided. The general manager of the club, a stern man in a tailored suit, walked briskly into the room. He carried a black leather folio and intentionally bypassed the broken ceramic plates on the floor. He walked straight up to Brenda, who was still sitting on the floor in her sequined gown, and handed her the final invoice. He stated in a flat, uncompromising tone that the remaining balance for the premium catering the upgraded vintage champagne and the venue rental was exactly $4,000. He demanded the balance be settled immediately. Brenda stared at the bill, her hands shaking violently. She looked up at Cassidy and desperately commanded her daughter to hand over her credit card, reminding her that she was supposed to be paying for the evening's expenses with her new loans. Cassidy buried her face in her hands, her voice completely muffled by her tears. She confessed to her mother that Jamal had legally frozen every single account tied to her name just hours ago. Her credit cards were dead. Her debit cards were useless. She had absolutely zero access to any funds. The manager's expression hardened into pure granite. He informed Brenda that if the massive bill was not paid in full, right this exact second, he would simply step outside and ask the remaining local police officers to add a felony charge for theft of services. Brenda let out a pathetic, defeated whimper. She had no other choice. She reached into her beaded evening bag with trembling fingers and pulled out her personal debit card. This was the account that held her emergency savings, the money she had relied on for her own security and retirement. She handed it up to the manager. He produced a mobile payment terminal, inserted the card, and waited for the network to process the funds. The machine beeped a sharp, high-pitched tone approving the transaction. With that single swipe of plastic, Brenda effectively emptied her entire life savings to pay for a lavish victory dinner celebrating her son's federal indictment. Jamal and I stood near the back of the room, bearing witness to the absolute total collapse of their toxic empire. They had nothing left to steal. There was no fake startup, no federal government funds, no adoring audience, and absolutely no money. The debt they owed to the truth had been fully collected. Jamal looked at me and gave a small, deeply satisfied nod. We turned our backs on the chaotic ruins of their family and walked out of the dining room. We strolled down the luxurious, warmly lit corridor of the country club, leaving the wailing sounds of Brenda and Cassidy echoing far behind us. We pushed open the heavy front doors of the venue and stepped out into the crisp, cool night air, entirely free. We pushed open the heavy front doors of the venue and stepped out into the crisp, cool night air, entirely free. The valet brought Jamal's car around in absolute silence. We drove back to the city without turning on the radio. We did not need music or celebration. The profound quiet of the car was the greatest reward we could have asked for. It was the sound of our lives finally returning to our own control. Flash forward exactly 1 year from that unforgettable night at the Oak Ridge Country Club. My life looks entirely different now, completely stripped of the parasitic weight I carried for 2 years. The peace in my personal life allowed me to focus entirely on my career. 3 months ago, I was officially promoted to Vice President of Data Analytics at my corporate firm. I still live in that gorgeous luxury condo overlooking Lake Michigan. Apollo, my golden retriever, spends his afternoons happily sleeping in the sunbeams that stretch across my living room floor. I no longer check my bank accounts with a sense of dread. I no longer wake up to the sound of video game rage or ridiculous financial demands. My home is a sanctuary, quiet, predictable, and entirely mine. Jamal and I remained in close contact. Trauma bonded us initially, but mutual respect forged a genuine, lasting friendship. He is doing incredibly well. Eleanor, his ruthless divorce attorney, completely dismantled Cassidy in family court. Because of the meticulously documented financial fraud, the judge awarded Jamal a disproportionate share of the marital estate to instantly recuperate the $80,000 stolen from his retirement fund. Cassidy was forced to surrender her vehicle and liquidate every single designer handbag and piece of jewelry she had purchased just to satisfy the court order. Today, Jamal is thriving in his career, dating a wonderful woman who actually respects him and traveling the world. We grab coffee at the 8th Street Cafe every few weeks, no longer plotting legal strategies, just enjoying life as two professionals who survived a nightmare. As for the people who tried to destroy us, reality delivered a brutal, unyielding wake-up call. Derek did not get to charm his way out of federal wire fraud. Faced with the recorded audio from the undercover federal agent and the forged documents we provided, his public defender advised him to take a plea deal rather than risk a decade behind bars. Derek is currently serving a 3-year sentence in a federal correctional institution. His grand tech empire officially consists of a metal bunk bed and a highly scheduled daily routine. He has no internet access, no video games, and absolutely no one to fund his delusions of grandeur. Cassidy suffered a completely different kind of prison. The divorce left her with nothing but massive high-interest debt from her predatory loans. Her fake wealthy lifestyle evaporated overnight. Today, the former family princess works 40 hours a week at a discount retail clothing store just to make the minimum payments on her crushing debt. She does not live in a luxury penthouse. Because she cannot afford rent anywhere in the city, she is permanently confined to the dark, unfinished basement of her mother's house. Brenda, whose life savings were completely wiped out, paying the country club invoice, now spends her days living with her miserable bankrupt daughter, while her golden boy sits in a federal cell. They are trapped together in a toxic, bitter cycle of their own making, entirely isolated from the family members who walked out on them that night. Looking back on the entire ordeal, I do not regret a single step I took. I do not regret cutting the utilities, breaking the lease, or walking into that country club in a silk dress to watch federal agents execute an arrest warrant. Society often tells women to be accommodating to keep the peace and to forgive toxic behavior in the name of love or family. But I learned the hard way that you cannot negotiate with entitlement and you can never satisfy a parasite. When dealing with manipulative people who believe they have the right to drain your resources, logic and legal boundaries are your only shields. True power isn't about yelling the loudest, it's about keeping the receipts. You do not need to win an argument or engage in a shouting match. You just need to gather your evidence, protect your assets, and let the law handle the rest. Have you ever had to use the law to deal with an entitled family member? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember to always protect your peace. The story of Natalie and Jamal serves as a powerful testament to the absolute necessity of replacing emotional reactions with calculated boundary-driven actions. When entangled with manipulative individuals who willfully exploit empathy for their own financial gain, tears, compromises, and verbal arguments are entirely ineffective currencies. The most critical takeaway from this ordeal is that true empowerment comes from meticulous documentation and unwavering legal boundaries. Manipulators like Derek and Cassidy thrive in the gray areas of guilt gaslighting and manufactured familial obligation. They weaponize affection, twist the truth, and use social pressure to systematically drain their victims. Natalie's ultimate victory was not achieved by screaming louder in a parking lot or pleading for basic human respect. It was secured by quietly gathering irrefutable data, immediately locking down her financial identity, and letting the stark, unforgiving reality of the law dismantle the abuser's delusions. When someone actively shows you they are willing to jeopardize your entire future to fund their immediate gratification, you must permanently stop negotiating. It is a sobering reminder that we must fiercely protect our peace and our hard-earned assets. Society frequently pressures us to compromise, to forgive repeatedly, and to keep the peace at all costs, especially within romantic or family dynamics. However, keeping the peace for others should never come at the cost of your own financial ruin or mental stability. By removing raw emotion from the equation and treating the betrayal as an objective problem to be solved with data logic and legal precision, victims can fully reclaim their autonomy and sever parasitic ties. Documentation and self-advocacy are the ultimate antidotes to manipulation. Take a moment today to rigorously review your own financial boundaries and ensure your digital security is fully protected from anyone who might take advantage of your trust.